This is Bringing the Darkness to the Light with Catherine Nadal, professional psychic medium.
Today we have Stephen B. Armstrong. He is a film and popular music historian with numerous publications, including Paul Bartel, The Life and Films, 2017, Pictures About Extremes, The Films of John Frankenheimer, 2008, and Andrew V. McLaglen, The Life and Hollywood Career, 2011. He is the author of I Want You Around, The Ramones, and The Making of Rock and Roll High School, 2023. He is also an editor of books and has his Ph.D. in English, creative writing, fiction from Florida State University. His short stories have appeared in journals, American Writing, and Criminal Class Review, among others. Currently, he is teaching creative writing emphasis at Utah Tech University in St. George, Utah. Welcome. It's so great to have you on, Stephen.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm so glad we were able to connect, I find your book, which, I have in front of me, is fascinating. Since I received it, I've been digging into it. And Rock and Roll High School is one of my all-time go-to favorite movies. So I'm really glad that you had the chance to write about this book.
Thank you. I received an email earlier today from a friend of mine, a cowboy writer, and I'd sent him a copy of the book. And I think he just thinks it's the strangest book that he's read in a long time. And so to know the Ramones, I think you'll like the book. And he doesn't know the Ramones. So
wow. Yeah, well, I don't know. There's quite a few people that know the Ramones. So I prepared some questions just to kind of unfold the book and unfold who you are to the audience. So one of my first questions is, growing up, at what age did you realize your love of music?
Well, like so many people, it was the Beatles and Paul McCartney in particular. Remember the first song I really liked was the Silly Love Song. When he sings "I Love You," my sister and I would just walk around the house singing it, and "Hey Jude" is one of those memories too. I just thought that was the most engaging song, and my parents had a wonderful record collection. It was I would listen to Abbey Road, 8 years old, whatever it may be, and just developing my ears that way. And while the Beatles were an introduction for me to pop music, it was really Lou Reed when I was 13 years old. He was on MTV, and I saw a video, and I thought, wow, that's the music I've always wanted to hear. And it was a short step from listening to Lou Reed to listening to the Ramones. And I've been a fan of Beatles, Lou Reed, Ramones ever since, and all of those acts have a kind of an attraction to sweet melodies and hard beats, and that's the formula for power pop. So I'm a real power pop fan, and again, it goes back to my childhood in the mid-'70s.
Oh, sure. Well, you named quite a few great bands there. I don't know how many people don't know any of those bands that you just named, because the Beatles are on the top of the list right there. So that's great. So you were pretty young, right? It sounded like, did your family actually play that type of music, or was it more like you kind of finding it out on your own about the Beatles?
The couple of songs on the radio, but it was my parents' vinyl collection, and the country music was having a moment then too, with Statler Brothers and Dolly Parton, and my father would bring home that music, and I told him that I loved radio, and he would record me. We would set up a song with me talking, and we called it the Stephen Armstrong Super Show. I guess that's what an 8-year-old would come up with, and just playing around with the music that he would buy at the nearby Sears. And I got Johnny Cash, Elvis, and just just like a DJ, talk about the music a little bit, play the song, and then talk about it some more.
Oh, that's cool. So you would interview each other?
Yeah, but or it would just be me talking and improvising, sounding like an 8-year-old with ums and uhs and likes and all that, trying to get it out. This is Dolly Parton. Here you come again. And then Dad would drop the tone arm, and the music would start coming out of the speakers.
On the vinyl, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you. That's really cool. I'm so glad that you were able to share that music experience with a parent because many children don't get that chance. So that's really great. Wow. So you and I have had a few conversations, and I want to say from speaking with you, I understand that you're a true fan of the Ramones and the punk scene. So when did that really develop for you? So I know that you had just talked about a lot of different music, but really kind of getting really deep into the Ramones.
Yeah. So I had I was really keen before I was able to drive on skateboarding, and mid 80s at this point. So I guess around 84, 85. This local the kid in the neighborhood and I, named Jason, we would just skateboard all day long, and at that point punk had sort of gone in the direction of hardcore and more, that range of Cro-Mags and stimulators, pulling away from the melody. So we had a boombox, and we would skate around to it. And usually, what was on was the Clash. And another friend of ours who skated said, it's the Ramones. Though that's the great band. He loved the New York Dolls too. Imagine a 13-year-old just crazy for New York Dolls and Ramones. And so we started playing the Rock and Roll High School cassette tape in the boombox when we were skating, and from that, the first one, the Ramones album, I remember that quite clearly, and then the self-titled album, and then Leave Home. And so Adam, who was the kid who turned me on to the Ramones, and he still loves the Ramones. He's got refrigerator magnets with, vote Johnny Ramone for president, that kind of thing. Adam said that he to watch the movie Rock and Roll High School, and it came on MTV periodically on Sunday nights. It was when the network was moving away from constant music videos. And while music brought my father and I together for the Stephen Armstrong Super Show, it divided us when I started listening to the Ramones. He thought it was just ghastly music. He thought it was anti-music, and I really was getting into it more and more. And so when Rock and Roll High School came on the TV, it was scheduled, and Adam said, "Look, man, you got to go watch this." It was later in the evening, and parents were upstairs in their room, and my sister was asleep. And so I just snuck down into the basement where we had one of those huge RCA box TV sets, and watched it with the volume down so that I didn't get caught, and was just enthralled by the movie itself, the performances and the music, and seeing the Ramones. And I was a little bit averse at first because back then I was reading a lot of rock and roll criticism and rock and roll magazines, and there was a sort of attitude toward the movie that it had embarrassed the Ramones, that they looked like dummies in it. And so I was cautious. I don't always like to know everything about the bands that I listen to, for fear of ruining the experience of enjoying them. But a good friend of mine is telling me this is the movie to watch. I watched it, and I just turned it off afterwards, and I sensed where my life was going after that, and that this sort of big feeling that the movie engendered in me. I've never lost it. I've never lost that craving for intensity and experience and thrills and adventures, and then punk rock is sort of the soundtrack, I think, for that attitude, and it's carried me very far in terms of personal happiness.
Yeah, I really enjoy that story that you tell because I could picture myself in the 80s and growing up. My best friend, her sister was really into punk, and she was older than us, so she was really going down to the scene and seeing all these bands that you mentioned, like the Dolls and, the Ramones and all of that. And she was always older than us, so we kind of looked up to her, but we didn't always understand the whole punk scene. We liked the Ramones, but we weren't into it like she was. So it's kind of interesting how there's a parallel in our stories that someone introduced you to it and you went, full head over heels over it. And, you know, my best friend and I were like, okay, like we'll just keep checking it out, you know? So, and I agree with you, you know, the rock scene, you know, they were, you know, they had their difference of opinion because it was completely different music. And, you know, a lot of people say that. I mean, it's quite obvious, but I really love your story. And I do remember trying to sneak, you know, TV shows on or trying to get approvals for things. So that's really just, you know, growing up, you know, with parents in the 80s. So I appreciate that. That's really a great story.
I
So,
mean, to take, oh yeah, but well, it's just my father in many ways was quite socially conservative, and we weren't allowed to watch Welcome Back, Kotter because he thought that the Sweat Hogs had an influence on us. And Three's Company, there was a little bit too many sex jokes, and he was thought that we would become, you know, we wouldn't be kids anymore, that we would be thinking in sex ways or something. I don't know what his reasoning was, but so to go sneak down and watch that movie was, you know, in defiance of the rules in the house. And the movie itself is about standing up to authority figures. And so life and art were sort of imitating each other simultaneously.
yeah, so yeah, it's true, actually. You know, I often think of a little bit of, you know, Kevin Bacon with doing his movie on Footloose with, you know,
Right.
going against music or sticking up for your music kind of a thing. But I understand that. My dad was, you know, more conservative. And I think during that time, you know, there were some TV shows that not every parent was allowed, you know, allowing their children. And I remember clearly, you know, going to school and really enjoying when the kids would say like "a," you know, like from Fonzie, because I was allowed to
Oh,
watch
right.
that.
Yeah.
So when there was references
I
to
love
other
that show.
shows,
Yeah.
references to other shows that I wasn't allowed to see, you know, I didn't really get what they were talking about. So I totally understand where you're coming from with that. I grew up near New York City, and you know, I often went to New York City as a teen. And I hung out on the Lower East Side. I had some friends on the Lower East Side. So, what was your experience like, you know, going to New York City? Maybe you were a teenager. What were your early experiences with New York City?
Well, I my mother's mother grew up on the train line to Hoboken. So and we grew up outside of Washington, D.C., my sister and I did. And so when we go up to see Missy, that was her name, my grandmother's name, you know, once or twice a year we'd go into the city, and it was usually uptown. It was to the museums or to go to an Italian restaurant and maybe go to Chinatown. And so it was sort of the touristy range of experiences. But when I was 16 and starting to could drive to the subway that would carry my friends and me into Washington, D.C., we'd go to Georgetown and we'd scour the bins for records and buy T-shirts and all that. And then I started making runs up to New York City, and I thought, I feel like this is where I'm supposed to be. And I would go and I'd just go up there. You know, as I was mentioned, I was really fond of Lou Reed back then, and Lou Reed wasn't this revered figure. He was sort of like you're lucky to find Transformer in the cassette tape racks at the Sam Goody, but go up to New York, down to the Village, and buy Lou Reed records that had gone out of print. And then I did my first year of college, and I was noticing that all the good writers lived in New York City or had lived in New York City. And I'd also become very interested in abstract expressionism, and many of the painters were in New York City after World War II. And I thought I better get to New York. And so the summer after my freshman year of college, I said, Dad, I found that there's a hostel in Harlem. I'm going to go stay there for the summer, try to get a job. And he didn't think that was a good idea. So he put me into a program at NYU. And I was living on East 10th Street. And suddenly I'm in the place where I've always wanted to be, that I've been dreaming about for years and years at that point. And there I was just able to kind of walk out the door of the dormitory, which was an old hotel. And they told us the first day that we got there, you know, Deborah Harry used to live in this building, you know, fabulous. And Blondie was another one of those bands that I loved so much. But I spent the summer just running around New York and the Lower East Side, whether it was, I mean, the Lower East Side, everybody thinks of it as sort of being, I guess, Village and the Bowery, but there was Alphabet City and going out to the East River and the merchants on Sundays and buying the clothing and so forth. And I just was just so happy there. It was the best summer of my life. And in fact, three things happened. One is that I was in a bank on Broadway, the Chemical Bank, and they had a piano, a Liberace type player tinkling the keys, and two people in front of me is Johnny Ramone. And I thought, wow, look at that. This is just a New York moment. And that same summer, I was down on Bleecker Street, and I see this guy who's grinning, and he's got his arms around the shoulders of two women. He's flanked by these attractive younger women, and it was Dee Dee Ramone. And wow, New York, New York, New York. And that was the summer met Spike Lee, and I can't even remember all the other things, but it was just such a fabulous way to sort of live in the place that you put on this earth to live in. Whenever I go to New York now, it doesn't have that big feeling that I had when I was 19, but I'm grateful for that version of New York that I had all those years ago.
That is amazing that your dad was able to give you that experience, the way he did it. And, little do you know, probably when he, thought of your first, idea, he said, oh, wow, let me take care of this, So he actually went over and beyond what most parents would have done by placing you in a actual program. And then the location of the program just was like amazing. So that's a really cool story. I like that.
Yeah. And that's the thing with my dad. And he passed about 15 months ago, and I just
I'm sorry.
thank you. But he was one of these people who had such a profound influence on my life, but in many ways sort of providing opportunities for me and also closing doors for me. So there was always this push-pull between us until I started to calm down, I guess, when I was in my 30s or so. Not that I was particularly wild, but I mean, just I started appreciating him more fully. And yet during those earlier days, we would have some pretty tough screaming matches about, maybe the music I was listening to when I was still in high school, or how I was dressing. And when I'm bald now, but I had seen the Misfits and in the photographs of Glenn Danzig, the lead singer for the band back then. He had the hair that grew down to his shoulder, to his chin, and I just doing that too. And it would just infuriate my father. And yet he's the same guy who would set me up in the building where Debbie Harry had lived and allow me to, as a 19-year-old, just have the best summer of my life wandering New York. He trusted me enough that way, and so it's a contradictory sort of scenario right there, that my father was the one who opened doors and closed them sometimes simultaneously.
Yeah, well, I think he was
And
probably a great dad.
yeah, he was. He really was. And when it came to rock and roll writing, he was always supportive of it. He's a jazz fan primarily, so he liked the New York City of the 1940s and 50s, and that music. And then here I was, music of the 70s and 80s, and when I started doing the rock and roll writing, he just applauded it. He saw that I would, that was the direction to take, and the movie writing too, the writing about the history of films and movie directors.
Yeah, that's really excellent. It's interesting, you're such a big fan of music, and what was your favorite kind of band? Seeing a band is one thing at a concert, but having a favorite band and then seeing your favorite band at a concert. So I'm sure the Ramones is probably on your list, but it's interesting when you have a favorite band and then you see them live. It somehow, for me personally, it changes the experience. I kind of like them more because I actually saw them live. So what is your experience with that?
Well, the first rock and roll concert I went to was Lou Reed and the Smithereens opened, and Smithereens are a power pop band, and that was great. And actually, my dad drove me to that concert. I with a buddy of mine, and and I was like, there he is. There's the man who's come up with these fabulous songs and is able to sort of translate emotion and melancholy and hope into kind of like power chords, and yet the most sensational shows though were not the Lou Reed shows. It was neat seeing him. One time he was there I saw a show with him with Dion DiMucci, and that was great too. But it's really, for me, it seems to be the shows that are super super loud and the crowd is just rocking back and forth in waves. And so I think the two best concerts I've ever seen were Neil Young and Crazy Horse, and the Ramones. These are separate shows, but the Ramones played a free gig, outdoor gig at the University of Maryland, and it was insane because they had the four guys. CJ was the bass player at that point, and Marky must have been on drums, but Johnny and Joey of the original formation were there, and the fans they'd set up a chain link fence around this stage, and the fans were just pulling on the chain link fence the whole show. And it was like a 47-minute concert, but you just see these strange guys in their leather jackets and their busted blue jeans playing songs that and with no break. It's just straight 47 minutes of sort of squalling beautiful noise, and the anarchy of it, the power of it. It left an impression on me that I've never lost, and came out of it loving the band more and realizing profoundly that live music is completely different than studio music. There's a world of difference between them.
Yeah.
And for many years, I was a concert junkie. Now where I live in southwest Utah, not a lot of acts come through here, but sometimes there will be a great show in Las Vegas, and I'll catch it. And like Jesus and Mary Chain, one of the best concerts I ever saw too. And they're a Ramones influenced band, Shangri-La's type influenced band, the sweet melody and the noise going with it.
Sure, yeah. A lot of your references that you just spoke of and that what you were just, recalling are, connected to two people that we both know. One of them is Spencer Drake. He designed the albums, a couple of album covers for the Ramones. And it's interesting because that album cover is in the Rock and Roll High School movie. And the other thing that I thought of is connected to another person we both know is Monty A. Melnick, who was the tour manager for the Ramones. And when I interviewed him, he actually spoke about exactly what you were just talking about how they had to really protect the stage and protect the band, and, how the crowd would really go crazy. And that was like a phenomenon, with the Ramones that some people didn't understand. So I really think it's cool that you were actually there to witness that with the crowd going wild.
Yeah, and then I had a chance to see Blondie a couple of years ago down in Las Vegas, and everybody in Blondie now, except for they have some newer players in the group, but these are people who are in their late 60s, and many of their fans were too. And that was a concert where they had this large wading pool. I mean, this is Las Vegas, so sit with your feet in the water and watch one of your favorite bands. But it was much more almost like watching a TV show almost. That intensity wasn't there. The Ramones seemed to catch lightning in a bottle, but it was mixed with nitroglycerin and TNT and uranium or something. It was just this explosion of movement and sound. But the Ramones. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
The band was signed.
My thought.
That's fine.
Yeah.
The band was signed with Sire Records in 1975 after becoming a regular band at CBGB's. Did you ever go to CBGB's, and what was that experience like for you if you went?
Yeah, and it was that summer, and that was the third sort of punk rock achievement I had that summer, seeing Johnny in the Bank Line, seeing Dee Dee on Bleecker Street, and then going over to CBGB. And so this was late 80s when I eventually got there, and the scene, it was New York hardcore at that point. It just the stuff of the sort of sweeter sounds, and this sounds odd to point to, say, the Dead Boys, but they liked melody. That kind of ramped up power pop was gone. Instead, it was thrash and hardcore, and that's what was playing at CBGB the night that some friends and I went there, and I just remember the flop houses. It's cleaned up quite a bit, but that was back then. If you walked along Bowery or Cooper Square or Tompkins Square and Cooper, like, it's been a while. Whatever Cooper was, you
Cooper
walk around
Union.
there. Yeah,
I
on
mean,
the way.
Union Square is 14th Street.
Yeah, no, this is whatever. Forget the Cooper, but that roughness, that at St. Mark's Place, it was all just horrible. It was you'd see the people in the flop houses looking out the windows, and then you're walking into CBGB, and it's like, wow, this is really tough. I hope I don't get mugged. And while we were trying to get out, an aggressive crack dealer came up to us afterwards, and it was one of those fortuitous moments when a cab is rolling by. We just hopped in the cab and got out of there. That was my memory of CBGB, and just how, sort of dirty it was, but still it's like it's just this architectural cradle of some of the greatest music ever produced.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
it was very special to
CBGB's
me.
is iconic. I mean, that place, that's iconic. History of New York City rock and roll, CBGB is kind of synonymous with that. So that's great. Yeah. New York City is, it was rough then, it's rough now, it's New York City. That's the way it goes here. I just wanted to talk about some stuff, other stuff, because you are an author and you've written quite a lot of stuff. I've written 2 books myself, and I often think back to when my writing actually started. My writing started in my teenage years. When do you remember getting involved with writing or having thoughts of doing any kind of creative writing, or even thinking that this could be a possible profession for you?
Yeah, it came to me in stages, and then I just started writing stories when I was in middle school. They didn't really go anywhere. And then when Beastie Boys came along, and they had come out of the New York hardcore scene, and were new entries to rap music. After liking Run DMC, then I heard the Beastie Boys, and it was so popular in my high school. I bought it and enjoyed that first License to Ill record. And I started trying to write poetry, and I'm not a poet, and I recognized that fairly early. And I just started writing through high school. And there were a couple of times when I got tossed out of the classroom because I was writing. There was a teacher, he was actually my track coach, and he would call me Goomba. He'd say, "Goomba, get out of here." And then I'd have to go sit in front of the vice principal's office. And instead of doing my classwork, I was writing stories. And I was very much influenced by Cream magazine and Spin magazine, and the work of a writer named Legs McNeil. I preferred Legs' sort of inside take on Lower Manhattan music more than I ever did with someone like Lester Bangs. It was sort of like this Legs who had been in with John Holmstrom in Punk magazine. John Holmstrom co-designed the Road to Ruin cover with Spencer. But I was like, I would like to be like Legs McNeil and just be able to go to concerts and know rock and rollers. And it didn't really go anywhere. I became an English major in college, thinking the more I read, the better I'll be. And the one and only piece of writing that I wrote that was an instance of music journalism was a review of a anthology, a Lou Reed anthology, and the school paper didn't pick it up. And so I just went in the direction for a long time of doing creative writing, short stories in particular. And when I was 23, I had my first short story published that got me convinced that this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to be a writer. And I was in graduate school at that point, and I really was sick of reading classic books. I wanted to write myself. So I'll compress this story, but what happened, basically, I quit graduate school and headed down to the Florida Keys. That's where Hemingway had been. My car broke down in Fort Lauderdale, and so that's where I landed. And I wrote several short stories down there, and eventually those would I was in West Palm for a while, in Boca Raton and Delray and Fort Lauderdale. I was moving around into these little motels they had down there, and was creating what would become the portfolio that I submitted to Florida State a couple of years later that got me into their creative writing program. And I did a lot of writing. I went to culinary school for a while too, and I finished that, but I found that I preferred writing about food and food preparation and food history far more than I did with preparing it. I've worked in many restaurants, and I the, strangely enough, culinary school brought me back to writing. I got very serious about it and dusted off those samples that I told you about that I'd written in South Florida, and I've been doing it without a break ever since. So I really to get published outside of creative writing, I was doing everything from writing letters to the editor or writing unsolicited pieces if I saw something that was interesting, like they're tearing down a movie theater or something, an old movie theater. I would write a story about that and hope that it would get picked up. And I did all kinds of writing that on topics that I never thought I would take on as I was trying to build up a catalog of work. One time I was not one time, but several times I wrote pieces on shoe repair for a trade magazine. Had no interest in it myself, but it was an opportunity presented to me, and it really a diversity of experiences I think strengthened me and showed that there's much more to writing than sort of coming up with a creative artsy idea and imitating a Flannery O'Connor or a Eudora Welty or a William Faulkner. No, it just sort of go that route of journalism, produce sturdy writing. And once I adopted that approach, there's never been a time when I haven't had trouble getting publications. And so I've done a lot of creative writing in my life, but the bulk of my publications are that sort of journalism that I can that really came about out of sort of necessity because there was nothing else to write about that would get me a publication credit. And fortunately, I started to write about films and to get into some larger magazines. And then the books came along, and that's what I do primarily these days is that I write books. Although I should mention that I just finished a 10,000 word article on the history of the Paley brothers, who were a CBGB's band, and were friends with the Ramones, and cut a song, "Come On, Come On, Come On, Come On, Little Darling," the Richie Havens song that appears on the soundtrack of Rock and Roll High School. In the
Oh,
closing credits.
great. Yeah,
Yeah,
so you
so.
speak of many life experiences that are woven into your writing. When did you think you could write the book on the film Rock and Roll High School?
And this goes back to my to the Paul Bartel book. Paul Bartel he grew up in the New York City area and had worked on movies in New York in the end of the 60s and early 70s, and wound up in Los Angeles and made a movie called Death Wish 2000 and for Roger Corman's company New World Pictures. And Death Race 2000, the people who cut the trailer for that movie, Joe Dante and Alan Arkish, are two of the people who did a great deal of work on Rock and Roll High School. But Paul Bartel, who's maybe best known for the movie Eating Raoul, the comedy about cannibals, and these people want to set up their own restaurant, and to get the money, they kill swingers and then sell the dead bodies to a dog food company. It's really grim stuff, but it's actually a fairly funny movie. And in that movie as well, there's Paul Bartel not only directed it, he's the star of it, but his wife in the film is Mary Warrenoff. And so, I've been watching these movies, and then Rock and Roll High School comes along in my life, and Paul Bartel is Mr. McGree in the film, and Mary Warrenoff is Miss Togar. I'm sort of mixing all these things up together, but the point is that after writing the Paul Bartel book about how this New York filmmaker became a low-budget independent film director and was friends with Joe, Alan Arkish, Joe Dante, and many others. When I was approached by an agent about trying to get a book, trying to get a contract for a book with a decent publisher. That was the idea that I spat out. I said the world could use a good look at Rock and Roll High School. Yeah, the agent wasn't too keen on it. He thought the movie was too obscure, but I pushed up by Backbeat books, and I got to work right afterwards.
Oh, Backbeat books. Very good. Yeah, you know, the title of your book, I Want You Around, shows a scene from the movie where the band is walking through the high school playing their instruments. It's a great photo because it shows the students that were following the band around. It also has a cameo of Monty A. Melnick, their tour manager of the Ramones, in that. Why was that photo selected for the cover?
That's and I'm just grabbing my copy right now, and that image right there where you see Johnny and Joey and Marky and Dee Dee, and then Monty's face right there. They're walking on the sidewalk in downtown Los Angeles, and it's probably the picture, other than the poster that Bill Stout designed for the movie. That's the picture that's in widest circulation, I think. And not only is Monty in it, but also Monty's briefcase is in it. You see it, and he's quite proud of that he had a Halliburton briefcase, and you can make it out in the photograph. But that was the go-to picture. The credit goes to a photographer named Karen Abramson, and I had sent a batch of work, batch of images, visual art to the publisher as I was finishing up the book, and they selected it. But what they did on top of that, which was so clever, is that they wrote the book is called I Want You Around, the Ramones and the Making of Rock and Roll High School. And the background for that we used with that photograph is black, and the lettering is this mustard yellow. And that's the same color scheme that Spencer worked up when he was designing the cover for Road to Ruin, which is the Ramones record that appears so frequently in the movie. So I've always been extremely happy with the cover since the book came out in September. It did such a good job on it.
Yeah, it's
you
really
see what
great.
the movie's about.
I love it though because when you mention the cover and everyone can look it up and buy it, but the cover, the way the print is, and it's so big and it's big and bright with the mustard yellow, and it really looks cool. I love it a lot. It's really great. I love the movie, and I really liked one of the main characters, Riff Randall, which was played by P.J. Souls. This actress had two major parts at the time. She was in the movie Carrie, and she was in Halloween. And I understand there's a story of her beating out Daryl Hannah and Patricia Arquette for the movie. Your book describes how they selected P.J. Souls in detail. Would you like to tell that story?
Yeah, sure. And so PJ had supporting roles in Carrie and in Halloween. And Halloween in particular had come through. I want to say that it was playing at the World Theater, which was across the street from the editing house where Alan Arkish, the film's director, Rock and Roll High School's director, was working. And anyway, he tells me that he and some of his friends saw Halloween, which is like Rock and Roll High School is an independently produced film, and he just thought she's a star. And so PJ had that advantage from the start that Alan thought she was great, and it wasn't a role that was simply offered to her, though. She had to compete. After the casting call and after several auditions, it came down to PJ or Roseanne Arquette. Corman came in. Roger Corman, the big boss, saw her, and this was after she and Rosanna had gone back and forth a little bit about who would get the role. And Corman, I don't know if this was in front of Roseanne Arquette or not, but Corman said to PJ, "Lighten your hair a little, and you got the part." And once that happened, she was gleeful. She was going to be the lead in this movie, and so they gave her a promise of salary, and many people would use it to buy a new refrigerator or pay the rent or whatever it may have been. PJ went out and bought clothes because she knew that the Ramones' biggest fan would have to dress quite a bit differently from all the other kids in the world. And there's PJ tells this great story of being down in Hollywood, and she sees this red silk satin puffy. I think it's called a baseball jacket or a bomber jacket, and just was in love with it. But uh, I think wait, let me step back. She had the money, but she had already set the jacket aside, anticipating getting offered the role because she knew if I got the role of Riff, that jacket is the one that she would wear. And so when she got the money and went to the clothes store, this vintage store, she said, "I'd like my red jacket that I've set aside, please." And they went to get it for her, and Rod Stewart was there at the same time. And then the two of them had a tug of war, not a tough one that would tear the jacket or anything like that, but it was just, hey, who's going to get this jacket? And eventually PJ got it. And if you see the start, and when you see the start of the movie and you see PJ, she's starting to take over the high school, beginning with the PA system, so that she and her friend Kate can get the airwaves and carry the message, deliver the message of rock and roll. She's wearing that satin red jacket right there. But she would lay her clothes out on her bed, and because she wasn't going, they didn't have a costumer to speak of. They didn't have wardrobe. She was going to make the role more hers by personalizing the clothing. So everything that she wears in that film, she's very brightly colored. Her clothing on is brightly colored. That's PJ's creation. That part of the story right there.
Yeah, I think it's great. And you really do a really great job with the book because certain parts of the book, you have photographs from the movie, and you can see a lot of these things, especially the clothing of her and how she selected them. So the other thing I wanted to say is not just PJ getting the role, but do you have a discussion about how the Ramones got chosen to be the band in Rock and Roll High School?
Oh, sure. Alan Arkish, when he was a student at NYU, Martin Scorsese was his teacher. Next door to where the film program was, Bill Graham had set up his concert hall, the Fillmore East. And Alan and several of his classmates, many of them all going to eventually to work for Roger Corman in Los Angeles, these young guys had jobs lighting the concerts or serving as ushers or whatever it may have been. Alan in particular would light the shows. And he went to dozens of shows. And when you're lighting a band, you're literally watching them with great intensity. You've got to get it right there with where the spot is hitting them. And he's going to a concert, and it's the Grateful Dead one night, and then it's John and Yoko, and then it's the Beach Boys with Brian Wilson, whatever it may have been. And he was just, and the Who. He loved the Who, and that's what he shared a passion for with Joey Ramone. And so you've got this guy who knows rock and roll, not just from reading it, not just from listening to it on vinyl, but being the performances. And when he went to California, it was his dream to make a movie that had a rock and roll heart like he did. And he dreamed of doing a sort of high school musical in the manner that parodied, almost like a Mad Magazine movie satire, parodied those old movies where the parents are so fearful of rock and roll menace. And he said, well, who's going to be the band? And he's thinking hard rock. He didn't know that much about punk. He'd listened to the Ramones' first three records, Ramones Leave Home and Rocket to Russia. And he thought that the really outstanding one in the bunch was Rocket to Russia. And he knew the Ramones, but they weren't yet on his radar. So he's plotting to get a rock and roll band into the movie, but his boss, Roger Corman, had seen the revenues from movies like Car Wash and Thank God It's Friday and Saturday Night Fever, and said, Alan, the movie musical you're going to make is going to have disco music in it. And so the film, according to Roger, was going to be disco high. And, Alan Arkish, like Riff Randall, stands up to the establishment, stands up to the authority, and without telling Roger, he picked the Ramones. Now, how did the Ramones come into Alan's purview? Well, there was an attorney working for New World at that point who had been at Warner Brothers, the Warner Brothers Records, and sent him over to Burbank to the main offices there. And the management, the marketing people said, "Well, what about Devo? How about Devo in your band? This movie, Devo in your movie Disco High?" And he knew Devo, and he said, "They're too much their own thing. They're too much their own concept. I don't think they would fit into the movie." And then the people said, "Well, what about Van Halen?" And the Alan said, "They're just too wild. I would never be able to control them or manage them." And then they said, "How about Cheap Trick?" Or Cheap Trick had been floating around as an idea, but Cheap Trick wanted 50,000 for the movie. And then they said, "How about Ramones?" And Alan thought that was funny, that you would have these guys who are sort of the anti-Cheap Trick. They're high concept and they're goofy, but instead of having a sort of Adonis type singing the leads, you have Joey Ramone, the opposite of that. And so while still telling his boss that the movie's going to be Disco High, he went out to New York City to a club uptown, not far from Sire Records, and went and saw the guys at a club called Hurrah, and was convinced, that this was the music for him. This was the music of teen revolution, of defiance. And that's it. He just loved he loved the impression that the Ramones made on the audience, and it was that same wildness that I saw in college, and which he captures in the big concert scene that appears about halfway through the film. That they are the radioactive TNT powered band, and he loved the sound of Rocket to Russia. Their power pop. They have two wonderful power pop records, Rocket to Russia and Road to Ruin. It was that period for them when they were really trying to blend power and melody. And so he liked the music, he liked the look, and he thought, above all, that they would translate into comedy. And he didn't sense that with those other bands being Devo, Cheap Trick, and Van Halen. Cheap Trick, I should add, was on Epic at that point, wasn't on Warner Brothers.
Oh, yeah. So what was your, in researching for this book, what was the take on the Ramones when they were approached with this idea about being in the movie, being like the star band of the movie?
Well, they loved it. And oftentimes before a show, the Ramones would play an acoustic gig. And so that night at Hurrah, Danny Fields and Monty were there. They led Alan backstage, and he got to see a mini acoustic concert put on by the Ramones. And he also, when he told them, "This is a film, you'll have songs, your music will wind up on the soundtrack. If it could lead to a hit," because that's what they really wanted at that point. They were convinced they could make it as a mainstream band, like the Bay City Rollers say. They liked that talk, but they also loved the idea that at the end of the film, the kids blow up the school, because they'd had, as many people do, rotten high school experiences. And this was something that they thought was pretty funny. It doesn't seem so funny now. I don't think the concept would work in a post-Columbine high school universe, but back then, the country was more innocent, and the idea of blowing up the school was more in that range of Mad Magazine than it was of whatever the latest school shooting may be these days.
Absolutely. Yeah. I want to go back to one of the storylines that's in the movie, which I always thought was really kind of comical. But one of the storylines is about this guy who's the matchmaker, and he has this love van that he calls it. Can you explain some of that, like the creativeness on that storyline, or how that kind of came about, like in your research for that? Because that to me was always really funny, about how he was trying to, set up, the Van Patten character for the right girl, and he wanted to date PJ, and it was, he kept feeling like he wasn't going to get forward, in the direction he wanted to, with the the love van that they kept setting up with this matchmaking guy. So can you give like a little bit of storyline of whatever you found in your research when making this movie?
Sure. So Eddie Deason was the actor who was originally going to play the part of Eagle Bauer, who is the the matchmaker. And he had an opportunity to be in a much bigger film, a Steven Spielberg movie called 1941. And so Alan Arkish, who knew Ron Howard he was a assistant director on Ron Howard, or second unit director on Ron Howard's first movie, Grand Theft Auto, in which Clint Howard also appears. And so when Eddie Deason stepped out, Alan said, I think Clint Howard would be good for the part. And Clint Howard said, yeah, no, there was no auditioning there. He was just able to do it. And he wasn't exactly sure of the role for Eaglebauer, how he was to play him, if he was going to be. If you read the script, he's presented as a nerd, but he's not a nerd in the movie. He's something almost undefinable. He's such a strange character, sort of sleazy, but also kind of a nice guy at the same time. And of course, he sells services to the students, whether it's to, one of the jokes is that he sold one of Tom's the Vince Van Patten character sold him his first touchdown, and he sells excuse notes and all that kind of thing, and he does the matchmaking. But Clint Howard explained to me that he wasn't really sure of the role until costuming. In that instance, he had access to clothes that he didn't have to buy, and he saw this little Superman charm on a necklace. And once he put that on, he became the character, the Eaglebauer character. And again, this sort of likable but sleazy sort of businessman who works out of the bathroom inside the men's room inside the high school. And so once he figured out that he is going to play the part in two ways, sleazy and pleasant or fun, it was great, because he was already balding at that point. He's quite bald now, and they paired him up with Vince Van Patten as the high school jock, who just is terrible around women, and all he wants to do is get together with someone, and so you have this ridiculous businessman who is working this goofus who's also very handsome, and the role is playing against type. Vince Van Patten was a competitive professional tennis player at the time, and his father, of course, was the star of Dick Van Patten was the star of Eight Is Enough, and so with the Eaglebauer character, it was a spontaneous creation. That's what I get from Clint. And a similar thing happened with Mary Warrenoff too, who plays the villain in the film with Miss Togar. She was going to play it riffing on the Aramis Brooks character from the TV show, a sort of pleasant school figure, but this one would have a mean streak in her. Well, the day that she showed up to shoot at one of the high schools, the Ramones were blasting through the speakers, and Alan and the film's producer, Mike Fennell, had all these local kids that they had hired as extras who were running through an abandoned high school in Watts, having the craziest time in the world. And when she saw that and was going into makeup, and her hair was created in that strange way that it looks in the film, her coiffure, her hairdo, she realized, you know what? I'm not going to play it any longer as Aramis Brooks, as Eve Arden. I'm going to play it as a sort of almost like a Nazi type. And so again, that was an instance where because the director, Alan Arkish, and the producer, Mike Fennell, were easygoing guys, she and Clint were able to really develop their characters almost through improvisation. And of course, those are two of the most memorable characters in that film.
Yeah, you're right. Well, those characters really worked because they were so different. And very often when I bring up that movie, someone will even mention her role or his role because they were so different. So that's great. In researching for this movie, were there any parts that you felt you needed to, omit or not mention on purpose? Because I'm sure you probably talked to a lot of people that were involved with working on the movie. Was there anything that you felt like you didn't want to bring into the book, or were there things that you found out that you thought, well, I definitely have to add that to the book?
One of the sad things that I realized while I was writing it is that a couple of the Ramones they would conduct themselves in ways that I myself wouldn't. And I just sort of, particularly, for instance, the drug use that Dee Dee was afflicted with. He was a terrible drug addict and alcoholic, it seems. I didn't really run with that too far. I pulled back, and some allegations too about Johnny. I mostly just sort of referred to material that had already been published and left it at that because I didn't want to run this sort of thread of darkness and tragedy through the book. It is in many ways supposed to be as sort of fun as the movie is. And yet I couldn't, in good faith, I had to address some of these shortcomings, but I didn't just turn it into a melodrama about drug addicts and people who, beat up women, that kind of thing. It's in there because it's history, but at the same time, I chose not to build it up too much.
Sure, I understand. It's interesting because looking back now over time, the Ramones played over 2,000 shows. And in 2002, the Ramones were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And in the beginning, nobody even predicted it or maybe even anticipated the sensation that they had. What impact do you think the movie had on their success as a band or on them personally?
Well, in the long run, it's been very good for the band. It worked as an entry point for people to the music because it's a popular, accessible movie. Right now, it's showing every couple of months on Turner Classic Movies. And then it's almost a ritual of passage. If you say you're a Ramones fan, sooner or later, you're going to watch Rock and Roll High School to see what it's about. And so I think it works to perpetuate the Ramones in our culture. And yet, when the movie came out, the shot callers at New World Pictures weren't exactly sure of what it was. The person who placed the movie in theaters around the country thought it was absolute trash. The guys were too ugly to be popular rock and roll stars, and he thought that the music was garbage. And so the movie had no support really from the people who work on distribution, and it floundered. It was not a hit. And then what happened is that Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert featured Rock and Roll High School in the summer of 1979 as one of their picks to be a movie that would eventually obtain cult status, like Rocky Horror Picture Show or Pink Flamingos or the old Todd Browning movie Freaks, and with the inspiration for the Pinhead character, the Gabba Gabba Hey. There's a failure of the movie to make it with audiences, and the failure of the soundtrack to generate a hit single was pretty devastating, especially for Johnny. Johnny was mad, but the other guys, they were just so happy to see themselves in the movies. And there's stories of Joey just watching it over and over and over again down in Greenwich Village when it was at one of the theaters down there, and just feeling good about himself, which he should have. And so in the years, the movie has never really left us. An early cable TV deal got it playing for audiences like the Movie Channel, I guess from 1980 onward, and then again the MTV, which helped to stimulate a revival of interest in the Ramones in the mid 80s. At that point, they'd gone kind of in a direction of new wave music with Pleasant Dreams. People were wondering what's up with the Ramones.
Sure.
And then the movie came along. People were like, wait a second, the Ramones are great. We forgot about it.
Yeah.
And,
that's so great, though.
But the irony, though, is that the MTV would play the movie at night on Sundays, but they wouldn't play music videos for the band during the day. So the only time you could ever see a Ramone was when the Sun City single was big. Do you remember that with
I do, yeah.
Little Steven and
I do,
so you
yeah.
saw Stiv Bators in that, and Lou Reed and Joey Ramone,
yeah,
but
that's great.
you wouldn't see a video from them from any of their albums.
Yeah. Well, I can't thank you enough. Yeah, I can't thank you enough for being on the show. This is the Ramones, the making of the Rock and Roll High School. I Want You Around. Thank you so much, everybody. Please check out his book, and I really appreciate you being on. We're gonna end the show with I Want You Around. Thank you.